Hey everybody, how's it going? Thanks for joining me this afternoon. I've got a great stream with a great guest that I think you're really going to enjoy. Before we get started around here, just want to remind you that one of the ways we keep the lights on is, of course, subscriptions to Blaze TV. And if you really want to get the premiere stuff, you need to go with Blaze Unlimited. If you head to blazeunlimited.com/Auron, you'll be able to get your new membership for $40 off for the first 50 subscribers. You'll get access to Frontier Magazine, which is a fantastic and beautiful publication. You'll find an article from me in the most current edition. And if you're one of the earliest people to take that promo code, not only will you get the $40 off, you're also going to receive a bonus of digital access to the first 3 issues of Frontier Magazine so you don't miss any of the fantastic content. So again, head over to blazeunlimited.com/Auron to subscribe and get your $40 off and your issue 4 of Frontier Magazine today. All right, guys, as you might have noticed, there seems to be a low-grade conservative civil war. Well, honestly, at this point, I'd say it's just escalated into a high-grade civil war at this point. Someone who I've discussed this topic with multiple times, he's been kind enough to have me on his show, and I think he has great insights about it, is Jason Whitlock. He's, of course, a host on The Blaze, just like me. Jason, thank you so much for coming on, man.
Auron, thank you so much for thinking of me.
Of course, like I said, you've had me on. You've been gracious enough to have me on to discuss this topic before. Nick Fuentes, how should the American right be reaching out to young men? Is there a way that we can have critical discussions that guys like Nick are talking about, but we can have them in a responsible and Christian way? And I really appreciate that you've been on the forefront on this, because I think you've been walking a very difficult but well-drawn line. And I would like to continue a conversation with you in that vein, because I think you've had good insights on this. Now, before we get started with any of the background or the drama or any of this, I just like to acknowledge on the outset that this is all happening after the death of Charlie Kirk. And I think this is one of the most disgusting displays I have ever seen in my life, like personal, private, professional, across the board. Like, you and I have opinions. We're paid to have opinions, right? And we're not shy about sharing those opinions. But in the aftermath of Charlie Kirk's death, my message, much like Matt Walsh's message was, we need to come together, right? Anyone who wants to defeat the left, we need to push our disagreements to the side, and we need to find a way to defeat these people. Because however I feel about someone who, might have more or less support for Israel than I do, ultimately they're not trying to shoot me, and the left is. And I thought after the death of Charlie Kirk, we would be able to pull together and at least agree on that. But instead, it seems like we've killed all of that political momentum and all of that drive and all of that collective effort. And we've decided to instead just pull the car over on the side of the road and beat each other until only one guy can drive the car. And I don't know about you, but for a guy like Charlie Kirk, who had many great abilities, but one of them is peacemaking, the fact that this is what's been made of his legacy, I just think it's horrible.
I agree with you to some degree in terms of this is disappointing coming out of the Charlie Kirk deal, but I think it's inevitable. I think that this conflict, this awakening, this iron sharpening iron has to happen. I don't see the conflict in political terms. I see them more in biblical and religious terms. I see this more as a battle of good versus evil. And so, Auron, I'm just someone that, tries to go out of my way to reject any sort of political identity. I want a Christian identity. And I think that's where this is all headed. Some people are still in a very hyper political mindset and haven't recognized where we're really at is, and I tweeted this out, I think this morning or last night, it's like, hey, what is our identity and where should our identity come from? And I think it should come from your religious faith, your country of origin, and your language. And many people want to take their identity from their politics. I think it's a mistake. And I think that that's all now people are starting to see the limits of these political identities. They change moment to moment, who you support, what you don't support. Whereas, if you're following Jesus Christ, the one true God, you're standing on a rock solid foundation of wisdom and truth that has survived for thousands of years.
I'll certainly agree with you that, unfortunately, I think this conflict was inevitable, right? And I think that that part is definitely true. And it is certainly bad that our identities have become so ideological and political. I think that you're exactly right. That is the fact that we have really been deracinated. We've been pulled out of the idea that we should have roots in our faith and in our country and our family, that these things are somehow ephemeral and you should really just change them depending on your economic beliefs or any of that stuff, or your geopolitical persuasion. I think that that is, deeply disturbing. I will say that I do think that ultimately, and this is how I think it should properly be ordered, your identity will inform your politics, right? And so the question is not, will you have, I guess, quote unquote, identity politics, but what identity will be most salient, right? Is it that you and I are brothers in Christ, or is it something else, right? And I think that is important. But of course, I also think, your nationality matters, right? The fact that we are both Americans gives us far more to share and far more in our collective identity than I would have with, say, a Christian in another country. Not that they are not also my brother in Christ, but this is what makes us collectively American in a way that we're not Armenian, even if that's a Christian country that we would both agree has Christian brothers there, but is not America. So I think you're right that ultimately we were going to come to blows on this. Like I said, I just wish this was not the moment. This has obviously been simmering for a long time. It was happening before Charlie. You can see that reflected in the very tensions and pressures Charlie was facing. But ultimately, sadly, it seems this is when the line was finally drawn, and here we are.
Yeah, and Auron, we have to consider the possibility that it's a blessing, that this is what God intended, and he wants people to have to recognize that, hey, Josh Hammer considers himself a conservative Republican and he's on the same team, but are his tactics any different than the left? And does he want to cancel people for having the wrong opinion? Does he want to make veiled threats at people, Tucker Carlson, because he didn't ask the right questions in an interview with Nick Fuentes? I've always contended that, Republican or Democrat, you're capable of the exact same sin, the exact same tactics, and it's only my Christian faith that puts restraints on me. Being a Republican or a Democrat puts no restraints on me.
Yeah, that's a very good point. A lot of people are saying that these tactics are leftist. I'm guilty of that too, but really they're just immoral, right? And
Yes.
that's what we should be saying. I think that's a very good point, rather than just trying to say that, those are the same thing. They're synonyms for each other. No, immoral is a separate category that is non-political. I think that's an excellent point. Well, let's get to the crux of the issue, right? Like, everybody kind of knows why we're here, but let's just kind of lay it out for people, so in case they are unfamiliar. Tucker Carlson had Nick Fuentes on his show. Now, I'm going to say this at the outset, and I want to be clear. I'm not saying it because I need to qualify for my statements who hate me. Trust me, lots of people hate me right now. And I'm not saying anything about Nick Fuentes to placate them. I'm just saying it because it's true. Nick Fuentes is a guy who has lied maliciously about me, and he has promoted people who have wished harm on my family through his events. So this is a guy I have no respect for. Anybody who's treated you that way, you just would see them as someone not worthy of respect. I think that's a reasonable, even as Christians, if you came to me forgiveness, okay, I can forgive. But in a general rule, if that's the way you're treating me and my family, then I'm not going to extend an invitation to you personally. But Tucker decided to have Nick on his show. Now, I think that Tucker pushed back on Nick a fair amount, and people pretending he didn't are looking for a reason to ignore that fact. I do think he could have pushed further. Frankly, I would have liked to see him push on the fact that Nick had attacked Erica Kirk, a grieving widow. I would have liked to seen him push back on the fact that there are many allegations around Nick's entourage about possible abuse, including sexual grooming. again, those could be false charges, but they would have been valid questions to ask, him there. And the funny thing is that the people who are so angry at Tucker, they never point any of that stuff out. It's all about Israel. And that's where you can really tell, unfortunately, what the heart of the problem is. They were already attacking Tucker on Israel before the Fuentes interview. They were saying that him delivering a gospel message at Charlie Kirk's funeral service was anti-Semitism. So when you already have a frame like that, it's hard for me to take seriously that this Nick Fuentes issue really was a Rubicon for you. It seems like you were building up to this position before the interview, and the interview just gave you the ammunition you wanted. Now, maybe we could say Tucker shouldn't have given them the ammunition, but I do think it's important to understand that frame before we then discuss the larger problem or non-problem of him talking to Nick Fuentes at all.
Yeah, this is, I am like you. If I would have interviewed Nick Fuentes differently than Tucker, and that's not a hyper criticism of Tucker, but there are things that were clearly left on the table that I'm interested in, would have questioned him about. But Tucker did provide some pushback and try to show the audience, like, no, this guy's an anti-Semite. I'm criticizing him very politely in a Christian fashion for being an anti-Semite, for singling out the Jewish people rather than criticizing Israel and Benjamin Netanyahu. Nick leans into some hyperbolic things about Jews. That's immoral. That for those of us that claim Christ as our Lord and Savior, we shouldn't do that. And Tucker pointed those things out. What many people wanted, though, was for Tucker to name call Nick Fuentes, conduct, not that Candace Owens did a horrible interview, but she did a very combative interview with Nick Fuentes. Mm-hmm. And I didn't think it was a good look for either one. I felt like Tucker went about it more cleverly, but and again, everybody knows I'm a huge Tucker Carlson supporter, and I consider the guy a friend, and I'm totally on Team Tucker. But I do think Tucker also used Nick Fuentes to demonstrate to the audience that, like, hey, people are calling me anti-Semitic. I'm not. I'm clear. I'm using the Nick Fuentes interview to say, this is what anti-Semitism sounds like. Here's what my positions are. And I thought Tucker was clever about doing that. But again, there are people that just wanted Tucker to bring out a gun and shoot Nick Fuentes and be done with it. And they're disappointed, and they're using it to take their real shots at Tucker for interviewing Daryl Cooper, for, again, not for allowing Daryl Cooper to say things about Winston Churchill that are supposed to be illegal to say. Everybody's got an agenda. The truth takes a back seat to people's agenda. They want to destroy Tucker Carlson and illegalize certain conversations. And again, when you're standing on the firm foundation of Jesus Christ, you fear nothing. There's nothing to fear about Nick Fuentes. We allowed Nick Fuentes to build an audience because no one wanted to deal with him and deal with the issues that he's bringing out. Is America's relationship with Israel, is it strategic? Is it healthy? Is it proper? These are questions young people want asked and answered. We've been afraid to do it. Nick Fuentes has filled the void and built an audience and a following. It's our fault as Christians, as people with the greatest source of truth. We should have dealt with Nick Fuentes a long time ago and called him into repentance. And if he's unwilling to repent, then yes, then we back completely away from him and just, God's going to deal with him, and we'll let, the truth fall where it may.
Yeah, again, you and I have talked about this before, so I don't want to belabor the point, but you're exactly right that ultimately The reason Fuentes has a fan base is because the conservative movement was unwilling to address many issues. Not just the Israel issue, but the fact that young men are facing the problems that they're facing, the fact that so much of the world has been corrupted by an ideology that the conservative movement seems to more or less kind of on board itself. The fact that anti-white hatred has been normalized in many of these areas. And that's a very interesting contrast. There are many, many people on the left who are, and frankly, some people on the right who are virulently anti-white. And nobody on the right has canceled anybody for interviewing them. Nobody has canceled anyone on the right for debating them. Many of those people will agree on certain things, maybe transgenderism, something, and they'll even have those people on and have a favorable discussion with them, right? That hatred of white people has not made them untouchable. It has not made them someone you cannot have discussions with. Nick Fuentes' attitudes towards Jewish people apparently do. I think, as Christians, we should not harbor ethnic hatred of any people that is against our Christianity. Black, white, Jewish, whatever, right? Like, this should be a consistent standard that we have, an equal weight and measure. But it's very clear from the reaction of the conservative movement that there's one opinion you're not allowed to have. Now, it's not just Jewish. There are other hatreds racially that the conservative movement would push back against more. But that one in particular will make you completely persona non grata on the right. But they'll reach out to pretty much everyone on the left who has an anti-white position and say, let's have a discussion. Let's talk about things. Let's move these things together. And that's the problem I have. It's not, we should, we should be mean to Jewish people. Of course you shouldn't. Of course you shouldn't harbor hatred in your heart. But that has to be equal. And when you apply that standard and you censor on only one side of that standard, everyone's going to notice. And guess what? You're just going to make someone like Nick Fuentes stronger. You're just proving his point to his followers. So again, you could have hit Nick on 13 different things that had nothing to do with Israel. But that's not what you wanted to hit him on, because there's really just one sacred identity that we seem to be unable to treat just like hatred for anyone else. And that's ultimately my issue. We should just have equal weights and measures here.
No question about it. I would, not to the same degree, but I would say the American Black identity gets a special level of protection that's unwarranted and unfair and unhealthy. And, it's not to the same degree, but it's dang close.
Well, I'm going to let you say that.
It's just factually true. And so I in combination, Black leftists, a part of the Jewish community that is very tribal, they have set a standard amongst themselves that if anyone is critical of us, they've gone too far and their religious faith is in jeopardy. But the thing for me, being a friend of Tucker Carlson, being someone that thinks, Tucker has been a force for good. When Josh Hammer writes in the Daily Mail, and I know that's not an American newspaper, but it is a newspaper, when he calls Tucker, the first sentence out of his mouth is, he's the most dangerous man in America. Oh my, Tucker Carlson? That's just mind-blowing. And then when you end it by saying he needs to be neutralized, I just can't believe people aren't rebuking Josh Hammer. I'm like, what are we doing here, man? The most dangerous man in the world, and he needs to be neutralized, or we have to neutralize him. And you go into the analogy of a fox in a hen house, and that now everyone wants to play the game. Well, he didn't mean eliminate him that way. Cut it out. And so, yes, there are things you can say about white people, particularly American white people, but it's just white people in general, that is reprehensible, it's unfair, and the longer we tolerate it, the more it won't just be Nick Fuentes, it's all the people that will be following in behind Nick Fuentes, young people and just smart older people aren't just going to tolerate, man, you can just say whatever you want about a white person and we're all good here. White people shouldn't tolerate it. Christians shouldn't tolerate it. Fair-minded people shouldn't tolerate it. American citizens shouldn't tolerate it. It's wrong. And it creates the Nick Fuenteses of the world.
Well, and yo, the generational aspect is so powerful here. If you look at what is happening, a lot of support for Israel in the United States, especially in the conservative movement, has been tied to the idea of dispensationalism, the idea that ultimately there is a biblical, godly requirement to support the nation state of Israel, its political goals, its political leaders, and that any deviation from that belief is not just immoral or not being a conservative, it's a direct violation of your Christian faith. Now, a lot of people my age and younger have looked at dispensationalism and said, look, this is a relatively novel understanding of the Bible. It's very clear that the church did not believe this until like 150 years ago at best. And maybe it's okay to return to a more traditional understanding that also makes far more sense for my nation and putting my nation forward as a priority. And because they have lost that support generationally, kind of everything else is unwinding from that. There's very few people under 40 in the conservative movement who aren't like directly paid to have these positions that believe that ultimately we should be that loyal to Israel. And again, I'm not trying to slander. I should phrase that because I'm not trying to make the like everybody who agrees with Israel is paid off. Like that's not what I'm trying to say. What I'm saying is that the people who were in the system and had professional positions for a long time and made a lot of money and had a lot of connections in the establishment built a lot of that in that environment where that was the way we understood our relationship with Israel. And it's just very clear that the up and coming generations do not have that outlook. And so if you want to make a case for supporting Israel, you really need to make it in an American first fashion, right? Like this is the benefit that we receive. This is why it makes sense for our country. And if you can't make the argument that way, and I think it's increasingly hard to make the argument that way, then you're going to lose. And honestly, you deserve to lose because that's what should be the standard for whether or not we approach this. And I think the big panic we're seeing, Jason, is that these people who have been in charge of the conservative movement for so long were relying on institutional power. They wielded the fundraising. They wielded things like the Heritage Foundation. And so now when TPLSA and the Heritage Foundation and these large, powerful, donor-driven organizations are siding with Tucker Carlson and not with kind of neocons, all of a sudden there's a panic mode because that's all they had left. They knew they had lost the young generation, but now they've lost the institutions too. And this is why we're seeing like all hands at deck on here because I think they know if they lose this battle, then they lose it all. If they lose the Heritage Foundation, then man, that's kind of the end of it, right?
Certainly. And look, I'm 58. And obviously I've been transparent that my serious journey as a Christian is about 10 years old. And so, and that's not a lot of time, but I'm 58 and, Genesis 12:3, the way it's been interpreted makes no sense to me. And so I've rejected dispensationalism and, at 58 years old, I'm not a young person. I'm just like, hey man, they're talking about the church. And the other thing that drives me crazy, Auron, is that like Catholics and Protestants can disagree on how they interpret the Bible and still find an uncomfortable peace with each other that, well, you got to believe what I believe, blah, 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 blah. But on if we disagree with the way Genesis 12:3 has been interpreted through the Schofield Bible and other places, well, now we've lost our salvation.
Right.
And I've had ministers that I really respect who have said for several years, have told me like, hey man, Genesis 12:3, that's not a salvation issue. That's why I don't focus on it. How I feel about Genesis 12:3 is not going to determine my salvation. And I agree with them on that because again, there's this thing we've done in Christianity where it's like, hey man, if you don't profess your love for Black Americans, you can't see heaven. I'm like, am I really that important? I, I didn't see that anywhere in the Bible. Jason Whitlock and black people are not the truth, the way, and the life. It's Jesus Christ. And so this standard that black people have made, like, well, man, if you don't love me, you're no good with God. And people of the Jewish faith, many of them have set up that standard. Like, if you don't agree with us on Genesis 12:3, there's no way you can be in good standing with Jesus Christ. I just don't see it in the Bible. And so, both the groups, one that I don't like the word pride or proud, but I'm part of the black so-called community. I love being black. This is the way God made me. I love it. But I completely disagree with our victimhood tactic and setting ourselves up as some sort of standard that if you don't love us, you're outside the faith. And I'm not trying to say you should hate black people, but I just don't work. When someone tells me, hey, I don't like you, Jason, I don't care. And I really don't. I'm more interested. How do you feel about Jesus Christ? Because if you feel the right way about Jesus Christ, these problems you have with me, once you meet me, get to know me, they will all disappear.
Yeah,
they will all disappear. And that is the reality. And that's the conversation that the mainstream media has never allowed us to have as it relates to racism or whatever. Is my dad was black and he was racist. He did not like white people. But when he met a white person, very respectful towards them. And if they treated him in a respectful way, he got along with them great. There was no problem. And trust me, there are white people that consider themselves racist. But when they meet a black person that treats them with respect in a way, and they find out we got shared values, they got no problem. And that's the true reality. And so that's what, again, when people say, oh, that white guy, he's racist, you should blah, blah. I go, well, my dad was racist and I loved him and he was great. And I never saw him mistreat anybody that treated him well. So, I'm going to let this older white dude or younger white dude think whatever he wants. I'm going to do me. And if he's got a Christian bone in his body, he's going to watch me do me and be like, oh, I'm good with him. That's the beauty of Christianity.
Agreed. And there's a joke post on Twitter that brings to mind something like, the racist community doesn't really care what color you are as long as you're sufficiently racist. Yeah, that's the old joke. But seriously, but in all seriousness, you're right that ultimately very few people, once you actually get, especially again, if they have a true Christian belief, you get them in the room, they're just going to find themselves completely incompatible with someone. Now, ultimately, they might have different cultures. Again, I do believe that nations are apart for a reason. You have different cultures, you have different traditions. God made us into nations because we were meant to live in this way. And a beautiful Japanese Christianity or a beautiful Armenian Christianity or a beautiful, Finnish Christianity is going to look different than an American Christianity. But it's still going to be Christianity. And we can find our brotherhood in our agreements on Christ. And you're, of course, right. Catholics and Protestants, look, yeah, the 30 Years' War was a thing, but today it's more or less a detente, right? Like we're not going to go to war over this stuff. But when it comes to Israel, that you will go to war with. And frankly, that kind of says everything, right? Like, where does your real value lie? Where's your real identity lie? It lies over the things you will go to war on. And sadly, if you're willing to go to war over Israel, then I got to say that's clearly where your value line is drawn. Now, I've seen some really horrific behavior, of course, on the anti-Israel side. I've said, when people were talking about, oh, well, Charlie Kirk was assassinated by Israel and all that, I immediately said, this is garbage. Don't talk like this. This is stupid. If you've got some kind of real, criticism of Israel, great. We'll have that discussion later. This is not how you should act after Charlie Kirk's death. But now I'm looking at the left and their attempt to smear everyone as a racist and to smear Charlie Kirk as a racist and a fascist and say that means we should be able to kill him, right? Like that's what was on the bullet shot at Charlie Kirk. Hey, fascists, catch. Now, Jason, we all agreed a few weeks ago, I'm pretty sure that's what I saw, at least on Twitter, that charge towards Charlie Kirk was instrumental in getting him killed. The anti-fascists, as they like to call themselves, the communists that want to murder you, they will use that as an excuse to treat you however you want. It's a moral blank check to say whatever you want to do and do whatever you do to people you hate. And now I'm watching tons of guys who all agreed with that 2 weeks ago call every single person they disagree with a fascist. I even saw, like, John had Podward, that's a whole nother problem, right? But he was sitting there calling Sean Davis, some leader of the Hitler Youth, who was reading the Elders of Zion, because he disagreed with him. Like, that is just, I'm sorry, these are open calls to murder. When Randy Fine says Tucker Carlson is a Nazi and a Hitler Youth leader, he is calling for the death of Tucker Carlson, and I will simply not pretend anything else. This is completely demonstrable behavior. It is a open call for violence. There is zero space for it on the right. There wasn't any space for it 3 weeks ago, but all of a sudden Israel re-enters the discussion, and it turns out everyone who disagrees with me, even on the right, is a Nazi. And by the way, I can say and do whatever I want to them because it's a moral blank check. We have the same ideology as the left at the end of the day.
It's important. The conversation we're having right now, the things we're doing over social media in terms of standing with Tucker Carlson and calling it out in real time and calling out the hypocrisy, it's all very important. Obviously, everybody should, like, Charlie Kirk was assassinated in front of everybody. He wasn't a president. He wasn't a senator. He wasn't a politician. And if whatever forces, and I truly do not know what forces, and I'm open to any explanation that killed Charlie Kirk, those same forces are certainly capable of doing the same thing to Tucker Carlson. They're capable of doing it to you or I. Yeah. And so that's why it's important for people to be like, hey, man, we got to draw a line in the sand here. I don't want to read newspaper articles saying Tucker's the most dangerous man. If he's the most dangerous man in America, someone should kill him. And that's basically what you're justifying. And then these other people that you've referenced, and I've seen it all because I've been very in tune with this and concerned about this. And on a positive note, because we can sit here and just belittle and belabor the problems, but this is why what Kevin Roberts and the Heritage Foundation did was so courageous and so important. Yes. And we need to celebrate Kevin Roberts. And I would also celebrate TPUSA in the same, not as much, but in the same way that they haven't backed away from Tucker Carlson. And there's a lot of pressure for them to do that. And maybe at some point they'll bend. But I think as long as Kevin Roberts and others start hopping on board, they're less likely to. But you know, I got, this is authentic. When I saw Kevin Roberts' video, I cried. I was like, holy cow, men are standing up and they're taking bold stances. And it's, I don't know how long it's been, 10, 15 years since men have really stood up and taken a bold stance. And I got a message from Tucker that he was equally as moved by what Kevin Roberts and Heritage did. And that's where my hope comes from. And I actually do have hope and optimism when I see Kevin Roberts and the Heritage Foundation, when I see what you're doing, when I see what I'm doing, and others that are rallying around Tucker Carlson. It gives me hope.
No, I agree. And you're absolutely right. We shouldn't just be focusing on the denouncements or the decrying. We should be focusing on the fact that men of that stature operating institutions of that importance are willing to take a stand. And I'll say, you know, TPUSA, the easiest thing in the world for them would have been to just cave to all of this, right? Like, Charlie clearly loved Israel. No matter how much he had other doubts about, you know, kind of the larger program, it would have been very easy to just be like, well, Tucker is the worst and we can't, you know, and just bury him under this stuff. And they haven't. Maybe they have not as been as forceful as Kevin has been, but they have been consistent in the face of pressure. And I think that is rather admirable, especially again for an organization that was very clearly very heavily donor reliant on many people who disagree with Tucker Carlson. And so it's been impressive to see them have a moral clarity and loyalty around that. Because I'll say this, I have disagreements with many people on this issue, right? They're at varying levels of disagreement. Some of them are minute, some of them are vast. But those people who have really been my friends, we're fine on this issue, and people who are professional and have big audiences, we're fine. Like, we're still talking, we're still friendly. This is not a problem, because loyalty is more important than ideology. Like, loyalty is just more important. That tells me more about you, that you believe in coming alongside a Christian brother and lifting them up, even if you disagree with them, even if you say, ultimately, I'm going to sit you down and we're going to talk about where we disagree. That disagreement and that conversation is internal, right? Because that's where we operate. We bring our instruction, we bring our correction first to the person who's wronged us or the person we think is wrong, not directly to the public to try to crucify them for attention in the public. Now we're coming up on some time here, and I don't want to keep you too long, but I do want to ask you this before we go. A lot of people have pointed out, Sean Davis of the Federalists, one of them, that this is largely a proxy war on JD Vance. That the reason they're going, there's a lot of personal, hurt feelings flying around, but ultimately JD Vance represents the new right, a non-interventionist right, someone who opposes neoconservatism in large degrees. And he's kind of the true successor of Trump and the MAGA movement. And because of that, the people who never wanted Trump, and it's hard not to notice a lot of these people were never Trumpers or just came back on board. And they, these people are suddenly the ones going after Tucker Carlson. They can't go after Trump anymore. They learned that won't work. And they've learned that even going after JD Vance is dicey. But what they can do is go after Tucker. And if they can kill Tucker and they can kill the new right and the online right, then JD Vance won't have like the momentum inside the movement. I want to get your reaction and possible impressions to that analysis.
That's fascinating. And, I'll reach out to Sean, who lives here in Nashville. We may have to try to get him on the show, because doesn't Tucker's son work for JD Vance?
He does. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, yeah.
Ironically, his name is Buckley, but yeah.
That is ironic. But yeah, that's fascinating. That's something I hadn't considered. You caught me off guard with that. I can see it. I'm gonna try to get Sean Davis on the show to talk about it, have him unpack it some more. That now the Never Trump crowd is still the Never Trump crowd. They've gritted their teeth for the last 12 years and dealt with Trump because they've had no choice. But have they ever been truly comfortable with Donald Trump? And just the lack of control that they've had over Trump. And it's not that they've had no control, but they haven't had nearly as much control as they're used to having with the people that are installed in the presidency. They want to put an end to that. Trump has been too much of a maverick, too unpredictable. And they don't, I could see them like JD Vance cut from the same cloth, and more of this Trump phenomenon would be a bad thing for the Never Trump crowd.
All right. Now, finally, I know this is off topic, but I have to ask because you're an expert. So my Buccaneers on an incredible run as someone who's born in Tampa. I'm a rare Florida native. Been my team for a long time, long suffering. Very few of our opportunities to truly.
Long suffering. You just won a Super Bowl 3 years ago.
Yeah, but before that, how long ago, Jason? How long? Right? I was in high school,
Gotcha.
To the last one. So yeah, I hear we're not in as dire straits. It's not like the Cubs before they won the World Series, but we're not exactly we're not the Patriots. We're not the Chiefs. We're not used to lining these babies up on a regular basis. But what do you think about the run the Tampa Bay is on this year, especially as it's missing some critical players, some critical veterans on the team?
I'm going to keep my feedback in line with what we've been talking about. And because this is what I do on my show. We talk sports, but we talk it from a cultural and biblical perspective. The Buccaneers have two unique forces at work and encouraging and lifting this team up. Baker Mayfield has a clear chip on his shoulder and wants to prove and justify why he was the number one overall pick, despite washing out in Cleveland. Baker Mayfield has discovered a faith in Jesus Christ that has strengthened him and inspired him. And then the head coach, Todd Bowles, is a true believer, and he won't play the racial political game. I don't know if you remember this, Auron, when they asked him about being a black coach and coaching against Mike Tomlin. Todd Bowles was like, well, what are you talking about, man? We ain't thinking about any of that. We're just two coaches, and he's not one of these racially idolatrous sports figures, Todd Bowles. And so I think he set a tremendous tone with the team. Many of these teams suffer from a victim mentality because it's tolerated by these coaches and in honor of wokeness. And you can't do that with Todd Bowles as your head coach and with someone with such a dynamic personality with a chip on his shoulder like Baker Mayfield. And so I think that's why they've been able to stay afloat despite all the injuries and stay really relevant. And they are. Baker Mayfield is one of the top 10 candidates for MVP. And at one point, he was probably the top candidate. And the season that Tampa's having doesn't really surprise me, given the values that have been instilled within that culture through Baker Mayfield and Todd Bowles. And they're one of the teams I'm rooting for and would like to see in the Super Bowl, just because I think of the message that they will send. I will say this, though, Auron, if they do make it to the Super Bowl, I won't be watching. I'm not watching the Super Bowl, and I'm damn sure not participating in the halftime show with this Bad Bunny deal. So I'm going to watch everything up to the Super Bowl, and then I'm out.
Well, TPUSA has that alternative halftime show, and rumors are that Creed might be playing there. So as someone who has been, pushing for the Creed halftime show for a very long time, let's hope that is a suitable alternative to the horrible display the NFL is planning at that time. But I'm glad I got to get the football question. And if I had, my father would have never forgiven me. He's like, if you're gonna have Jason on the show, you got to ask him about football. It's not okay to ignore it. So I wanted to say that I really appreciate you coming on, man. I know you've got a couple different YouTube channels now. So can you tell people where to find your show?
Main shows every morning at 10 a.m. Central Time. It's just youtube.com/Jason Whitlock. Then we have a Harmony channel where we talk about things from a more explicit biblical point of view. I believe that's Jason Whitlock Harmony. And then we have something I'd like to do with country music called BYOG. Myself and Jeffrey Steele talk country music on that channel and just talk about the music industry on that channel. So, yeah, check me out. You can get me in 3 different locations. Would love for you to come join us.
Fantastic, guys. Well, make sure that you are, of course, watching Jason's show. And if it's your first time on this channel, you need to click subscribe, the bell, notifications, all that stuff on YouTube so you know when we're going live. And if you want to get these podcasts as broadcasts, or the other way around, if you would like to get this as a podcast, you need to subscribe to the Auron MacIntyre Show on your favorite podcast network. Thank you, everybody, for watching. And as always, I will talk to you next time.